Do you believe in God? I mean, I know we say we do. I know that you go to church and you listen to some gospel music, but how much do you actually believe? Do you believe enough to trust him? And how far does that trust go? Being a father, I know sometimes it's a scary position to be in because you want to do a good job. And being a parent, I'm sure everybody can attest to this that has children. At some point in time, you were just afraid that you were going to somehow mess up this kid's life. But you wanted them to be better than you. And so you try. And sometimes we feel like, and I'll speak for myself, sometimes I feel like the people in the Bible, they had it together. They had a different relationship with God. They got to hear his voice. They got to, see his presence. But the more I read the Bible, the more I get to see that the people in the book, they were all flawed. They were all fearful. They were all like us. They were all like us. The Bible didn't pick these extraordinary people. He picked regular people and gave them extraordinary stories, extraordinary lives, gave them supernatural experiences. Take Moses. From the time you were a child, you learn that Moses was this hero that set the people free, set the children of Israel free from captivity of the Egyptians and Pharaoh. They make movies about it. They even write secular stories about Moses. But when you look at Moses in the Bible, you don't see this extraordinary person, at least not at first. You know the story. Moses starts off as a baby, and he's supposed to get killed. At that point in time, the Egyptians felt that the Israelites were growing too fast in number. So they decided that all the young men that were born were to be killed at birth. His mother decided to put him in a basket and usher him down the river. He was found by the servant of Pharaoh's daughter and raised as one of them. And everything was great. That could have been the happy ending, but it's not. He continues to have a burden put on his heart for his people because he doesn't forget where he came from. And so one day he sees an Egyptian assaulting a Hebrew slave. And he feels for that slave. He knows his people and he sees his people suffering. And yet he's in the position to do something about it. And he felt that burden. So he decided to kill him. He killed the Egyptian guard. Now, I'm not suggesting anybody do that today. Once again, that's not where the story ends. If it ended there, that would be a strange story for the Bible. But when he finds out that other people know about what he has done, he runs away. For 40 years, he becomes somebody who lived in the palace to somebody who cares after sheep until he has his face-to-face encounter with God. Now, you know the story. He's walking one day and he sees a burning bush. This is in Exodus. sees the burning bush and he decides to come closer. The burning bush is not consumed. Finally, he hears a voice from the bush that calls out his name. And the voice says, "Take off your sandals because you're on holy ground." And that very thing that was put on his heart, that burden that was put on his heart so many years ago for his people, has now reached the ears of God. And God is commissioning him to be the person to set them free. So, like anybody who's given a task that's way too much for them, he starts to question if he's the right person for this. He starts to let his fear overcome him. He starts arguing with God. What if they don't believe me? What if I'm not the right person? What if? And as parents, as fathers, I think we often are in the position of what if? What if I don't have what it takes to be a good father? What if I don't have the right mindset to be a good influence? What if I do something that messes up this kid's life? What if I discipline too much? What if I don't discipline at all? What if? We'll pick up the story in Exodus 4. I'm using the New King James Version today. In Exodus 4, it starts off, "Then Moses answered and said, 'But what if they do not believe me or listen to my voice? Suppose they say, the Lord has not appeared to me.' So the Lord said to him, 'What is in your hand?'" Now, pay attention. That's the whole sermon. What is in your hand? So many times in the Bible, people go to God and they're asking God for more. They're asking God for a breakthrough. They're asking God for so many things, and God turns it back and says, "Well, what do you have already?" I've figured out this amazing truth that God's plan is already worked out. He already got it. The only thing that he is waiting on is your part. What is that in your hand? Moses replied, "A rod." Verse 3. And he said, "Cast it on the ground." So he cast it on the ground and it became a serpent. Now, that would freak me out. He's been carrying the staff. He's a shepherd now. So he's been carrying the staff. He's used the staff to fight off animals. He's used the staff to protect the sheep. He's used the staff and been carrying it around forever. And now you're telling me that the whole time it was a snake? I don't like snakes. I don't know if you like snakes, but when you see a snake, you start moving. And that's exactly what Moses did. He cast it on the ground and it became a serpent. And then Moses fled from it. That's what I would do. Just like me. Imagine today, right? Imagine right now. You have, let's say, a pen in your hand, and it's your favorite pen, and it writes really nice, and God tells you to put it on the desk, and it turns into a snake. What would you do? Seriously, what would you do? I'm getting out of wherever that room is. I'm running. Moses is just like us. He fled. And then God challenges him, and God says, "Reach out your hand and take it by the tail." Now, I'm no expert, but the worst thing that you can do to a snake is grab its tail, because that leaves it free to turn around and bite you. I don't want to get bit, This would definitely be me having an argument with God. God, I don't know if you know about snakes, but they can turn around. I'm not grabbing this thing by the tail. But Moses listens to God. He reached out his hand. He caught it, and it became a rod in his hand. God said that they might believe that the Lord God of their fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob, has appeared to you. Furthermore, the Lord said to him, now put your hand in your bosom. And he put his hand in his bosom, and when he took it out, behold, his hand was leprous, like snow. And he said, put your hand in your bosom again. So he put his hand in his bosom again and drew it out of his bosom, and behold, it was restored. Moses was a lot like us. He was scared. And his fear didn't stop there. He had miracles. A burning bush. A rod that turned into a serpent. A hand that went from being normal to being leprous to being normal. And this is within a short period of time. He has these signs and miracles, and yet he's still scared. When we jump down to verse 10, then Moses said to the Lord, O my Lord, I am not eloquent, neither before nor since you have spoken to your servant, but I am slow to speech and slow of tongue. Now, some people believe that Moses stuttered. I would have started stuttering when the snake came out of the rod. But it says in the Bible, he was already slow of speech. Just a clarification. I am slow of speech and slow of tongue. So the Lord said to him, who has made man's mouth? Or who makes the mute, the deaf, the seeing, or the blind? Have not I, the Lord? Now therefore go, and I will be with your mouth, and teach you what you shall say. But he's still scared. I don't talk well. Now I want to pause right there. I've heard some people say, I don't pray like you pray, or I can't say it as eloquently as you have said it, and I don't know how to do it like you did. Why does that matter? When a baby is talking to their parent, they don't even use words, and they have the parent's attention. They have the parent's attentiveness. My godson says something like, it sounds a little bit like God Daddy, but whenever he says it, he has my ear. My son, when he was little, he used to like to climb on stuff, and without any warning, jump off. And I'm supposed to catch him. And luckily for me, I can say I never dropped him completely. He's never hit the ground. But there were times where, all of a sudden I see this thing leaping through the air, and it's all of a sudden my responsibility to catch him. How much more does God look after us, that he's able to catch us, that he's willing? As parents and as fathers, a lot of times the fear tends to take over. And there's a lot of fathers that walk out of their children's lives because they're afraid. There's fathers that are frustrated with the relationship with the mother, and they walk away because they feel like they can't take it. And I can understand it. There are fathers who are absent because at one point in time they were incarcerated or just away, and they don't know how to get back into right relationship with their kids or with their families. And I get that too. And the devil's job is to keep a father away. Is to keep a father away from God, to keep a father away from his responsibility and his duty, to keep him away, because then he is out of place. Imagine if Moses never walked up to the burning bush. I mean, he's a murderer after all. He's a failure in the sense that, he was in the palace and now he's herding sheep. He went from this great prominence, this great potential, to not so much. And he'd been there for 40 years. Yet here is God meeting him exactly where he is and giving him a commission based on the burden on his heart, based on his people, based on his family, giving him an opportunity to fight for them, to fight with them, and to lead them to freedom. So he goes to Pharaoh, and God says it's not going to be easy. I'm going to harden Pharaoh's heart. It's not going to be easy, but I will do the signs. Now, a lot of people believe in that first meeting with Pharaoh, Moses threw down his staff and it turned into a serpent. And then Pharaoh's magicians threw down their staffs and they turned into serpents. And then Moses' serpent ate the other serpents and then turned back into a staff. Well, do you believe that? Well, when I read the Bible, that's not quite how I see it. And that's why it's important not to just take people's word for it, even pastors or ministers. Don't take their word for it. Get into the book, read it for yourself. Exodus chapter 5, verse 4. Then the king of Egypt said to them, Moses and Aaron, why do you take the people from their work? Get back to your labor. And Pharaoh said, look, the people of the land are many now, and you make them rest from their labor. 6. The same day, Pharaoh commanded the taskmasters of the people and their officers, saying, you shall no longer give the people straw or make bricks as before. Let them go and gather straw for themselves. He's making it even harder on them. That's the fear of a parent. Are my actions messing up the things that my kid has? In chapter 7, so the Lord said to Moses, see, I have made you as God to Pharaoh, and Aaron your brother shall be your prophet. You shall speak all that I command you, and Aaron your brother shall tell Pharaoh to send the children of Israel out of his land. And I will harden Pharaoh's heart and multiply my signs, my wonders in the land of Egypt. But Pharaoh will not heed you, so that I may lay my hand on Egypt and bring my armies and my people, the children of Israel, out of the land by great judgment. And the Egyptians shall know that I am the Lord when I stretch out my hand on Egypt and bring out the children of Israel from among them. Then Moses and Aaron did so as the Lord commanded them. So they did. And Moses was 80 years old, and Aaron 83 years old, when they spoke to Pharaoh. It's not getting any easier. He's going to harden their hearts. Verse 8, then the Lord spoke to Moses and Aaron, saying, Pharaoh speaks to you, saying, show a miracle of yourselves. Then you shall say to Aaron, take your rod and cast it before Pharaoh and let it become a serpent. So Moses and Aaron went to Pharaoh, and they did so, just as the Lord commanded. And Aaron cast down his rod before Pharaoh and his servants, and it became a serpent. It was Aaron's rod, not Moses. But Pharaoh also called his wise men and his sorcerers. So the magicians of Egypt, they also did in like manner, they with their enchantments. So every man threw down his rod, and they became serpents. But Aaron's rod swallowed up their rods. We don't know how many it was. It was more than one. And Pharaoh's heart grew hard, and he did not heed them, as the Lord said. So the people are frustrated. Pharaoh is mad. The magicians were able to do the same thing, yet God's power was still stronger. And that's important. No matter what other people can create, God's power is still stronger. Here's the whole lesson. Here's everything. If, in the words of Pastor Sheldon, if you don't get anything else from this, listen to this right here. Whose hands do you trust to put your situation in? That's what it boils down to. Because Moses was minding his own business, and God came and talked to him and said, throw down your rod. Throw down your rod. And that throw down your rod is really put it in my hand. And here's the thing. In anything that's in your hand is ordinary. Anything in your hand is ordinary. God said, what is that in your hand? He said, it's a rod. But when you take it and you give it to God, it becomes supernatural. Anything that you give to God immediately becomes supernatural. And when you take it back up, it's back to ordinary. Let me put this another way. I saw this thing on Facebook recently. Thank you, Mike Augustine, for sending this to me. When you put a basketball in my hand, it might be worth $30. Take that same basketball. You put it in the hands of Kobe Bryant. It's worth $3 million. When Kobe Bryant was a rookie, his first contract out of high school, $3 million. You take Corey Goff. If you don't know who she is, you will, as much as you know who Serena and Venus Williams are. But she's a young tennis player. You take a tennis racket, you put it in my hand. Might be worth $50. I don't really know how much tennis rackets cost. You put it in her hand, and at 16 years old, $2.5 million. Lucas Hunt. You take a yard sign and you put it in my yard. It might be worth $15. But Lucas took the yard sign and he put it in God's hand. And they have sold over 250,000 Thank You Jesus yard signs at about $10 each. $2.5 million from a single idea, but with the blessing of God. You take 2 fishes and 5 loaves of bread. In my hand, I may have lunch. I may have enough to share with one person. You take that same thing with the blessing of God and you put it in Jesus' hand. You can feed the masses. You take a couple of nails and you put it in my hand. I might be able to nail down some wood. I might be able to build you a weirdly shaped birdhouse. When I was in middle school, I think it was a cutting board. They don't have shop class anymore in a lot of places, but we had shop. I made a cutting board. My birdhouse didn't turn out so well. You take a couple of nails. You pierce the hand of Jesus. And you get salvation for anyone who wants it. Anyone who believes in the Son repents. And you have everlasting life for anyone who chooses so. I couldn't do that for you. Jesus could. Anything that you have in your own hand, it's natural. It's ordinary. But when you give it to God, it becomes supernatural. Now, your children, they're in your hands. They were given to you. When you give them back to God, knowing that God loves your children more than you ever could, more than your capacity, when you give your children to God, their experience can become so much more than what you could ever give them. There's so many times in the Bible where someone took something ordinary and gave it to God, and the extraordinary happens. You think of in 2 Kings chapter 4, there's a widow. Her husband dies, and her husband was in debt. And so the people that her husband owed money to are coming to collect. She doesn't have any money, and so they're going to take her sons and make them slaves to pay back the debt. And she goes to the prophet, and he says, "What do you have in your house?" She says, "The only thing I have is a small jar of oil." He says, "Collect as many jars as you can, and from that jar, pour into those jars and sell them." Now, he didn't say, "I'm going to give you a loan," or I'm going to find a way to raise some money for you, or we're going to start a GoFundMe. That's not what he did. He said, "Use the relationships that you have. Give it to God and watch the supernatural happen." That's powerful, isn't it? The ordinary put into God's hands becomes supernatural. And this is not about tithes and offering, but that's the concept of tithes and offering. Your money is worth whatever it's worth. In the hands of God, it's worth so much more. The ordinary becomes the supernatural. You get it? Every time that people wanted to have a breakthrough, have a blessing, needed something in their life, God said, "Okay, what's in your hand? Give me something that I can work with." And the minute they gave it to God, God turns back and does something extraordinary with it. Fathers, parents, what do you have in your hand when it comes to your children? When it comes to your families, what do you have in your hands? Are you willing to give it to God? If it's just time, will you give your time to God? If it's some experiences, will you give your knowledge, your wisdom? Will you give it to God? Maybe you're one of those people that says, well, I've never been a good example. I've never had a good example. I don't really want to mess up this kid's life. Well, I have a good example for you. His name is Jesus Christ. And if you give him whatever it is that you have, remember Moses was a murderer. Whatever it is that you have, if you give it to God, watch the extraordinary happen. Before my son was born, I didn't make a lot of money. And while his mom was pregnant, I ended up taking a second job because I was afraid, how am I going to provide for this kid? How am I going to pay for diapers and formula and clothing? And how am I going to take care of this kid? What am I supposed to do with a whole human? And much like Moses, slowly but surely, God built my faith to know that I can't take care of him, that I need to trust in God to take care of me so that I may take care of him. I had to be a father to this kid, and he changed my life. But the change that happened is I started learning that I can't do it, that God has to do it. And so any boasting that I can do about how great of a father I've been and how amazing of an example I've been would be a lie. Here's an encouragement. Fathers, don't try to make your kids Christians. Yet, just try to be a good follower of Christ. Don't try to make your kid perfect. You pursue perfection, because the example that you are to them while following Christ is the example that they will grow up to know, that they will grow up to emulate, that they will grow up to try to become. Give it to God. I know it's cliche, but it's true. Anything in your hand is ordinary. But when you give it to God, the extraordinary happens. Let's pray. Lord, I thank you for not making me capable, for putting me in a position where I have to depend on you, where I have to trust you, where I have to know that you are in control, Lord. And so whatever it is that we're dealing with today, Lord, whether it's frustration, whether it's fear, whether it's depression, whether it's finances, Lord, whether it's addiction, Lord, whatever it is that your people are dealing with today, Lord, we ask that you meet them there, that you be that burning bush in their life, Lord, that they might come to see you and pour out all their cares, all their fears, Lord, all their struggles, that they might pour it out, Lord, that they might place it in your hand. And as they place it in your hand, Lord, that you would hold on to it, that they won't grab it by the tail and pick it back up, Lord, but that they'll leave it with you and watch the supernatural happen. Watch the healing begin. Watch the wisdom pour in. Watch the finances change, Lord. Watch the fear be erased, Lord. Watch all the brokenness come back together, Lord. Watch the supernatural that only comes from you. Watch that happen. Let us see you risen, powerful, amazing. Let us see you today. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Once again, thank you so much for joining us. Be sure to follow us and comment. We appreciate it. Thank you, and you be blessed.